Hi, my name is Jason T. Ingram. I also go by the name Fake Zappa. It has to do with my art career, multimedia work, and activism. Thank you for coming to my series that I call Referral Madness. It's a pun off of the movie we probably have all heard of called Reefer Madness from the 30s, an anti-cannabis movie. And I thought it was a fun name to use to talk about trying to get help for yourself or for somebody else. I started this series in 2017 when I was working on a series about having a career and living with mental illness and how hard that is. And I was documenting my success, which never happened. And that was a surprise to me because I was doing everything right. It's just that when you're on disability, you're in a different social status. There are people that are heard and people that are not heard. And I realized that I was one of these people that weren't heard by folks that are in a place of influence and power. I also had some horrible realizations when I did the series called Referral Madness. And I wish I would have known the end from the beginning, or else I would have taken a totally different approach. But it did prove something, which I was curious about. Can somebody get help when they're in crisis? Well, a lot of it's according to the time and place. If they're in a location that is renowned for having a hard time getting adequate mental health care, and I mean adequate mental health care, not just throwing money at somebody and throwing time at them or sending them to some dead-end place or some kind of nonprofit or whatever that might not get them stable, it might not get them continued care. Adequate mental health is when somebody recovers, not necessarily their treatment. And if you want to Google something, you can Google the recovery model versus the treatment model when it comes to mental health. So what is self-advocacy? It's basically somebody trying to find help for themselves when it comes to calling out, emailing, and visiting different agencies, going to websites, finding out what they can provide, and seeing if you could get referrals from them to other organizations if they can't meet your needs. Now, there's something that I continue to call the cycle of dead-end referrals. Dead-end referrals is when you go full circle. When A refers you to B, that refers you to C, D, E, and F, and they finally get you back to A. And you've tried every single one. You've told them what you need. You told them what your insurance is or whatever it is. And they say, call this organization. They can help you. Call this organization. They probably can help you. Call this person at an organization. I know them. They can help you. And still, you get the runaround. You get the runaround. Now, here's something that I've noticed living in a hyper-polite, sort of like a type of progressive community that seems to put a lot of emphasis on education, is that they have a hard time saying no. In fact, there is a term in the Pacific Northwest called the Seattle no. And the Seattle no is, oh, that's okay, thank you. Or, could you call me about that? Or, hey, let's talk about that sometime. These are all versions of people saying the word no that don't fucking have the balls to say it. And so when you get on the East Coast, they say no way too much. So it might be different when you're advocating for yourself in different parts of the United States and different parts of the world based on their culture. Now, timing is a really sad thing because we are in a time in our history when the rich are getting richer, the powerful are getting more powerful, and you see the trickle-down effect going up and not down. So power is centralizing itself when large corporations are buying, smaller corporations, and then you get these monster corporations that are buying the large corporations and stuff. And so what you see is you get whatever abuse is on the top of these huge healthcare conglomerates and all that kind of stuff is trickled down with forms of the abuse of power, attitudes of cutting corners, shortcuts, budget cuts, things like that. And an overabundance of rules and regulations that come from corporate, and a general fear of trying to conform, where no matter where you are or when it is or who you're dealing with, to this cookie cutter type thing that doesn't work for everybody. In fact, sometimes it doesn't work for hardly anybody at all, especially those that deal with debilitating mental health issues. So what happens when you don't have anybody to advocate for you? Well, you can train people how to advocate for you. This doesn't work. You simply can't tell your friends, okay, this is how to do it. I want you to call, get their name, write it down, document it, ask them where to do this, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing is that you got to find somebody who's done this before. You got to find somebody who's had some kind of training, especially in peer support, or maybe somebody who has been there and they have to have a relative amount of health at the time, and they have to be assertive. And that's a huge thing too, is that if I have somebody advocating for myself and they're like, hi, we have this, well, we have the little problem here, and this person, well, he might need some help and he might not, but if you don't want to, that's okay. Oh, okay, bye. You know, And so if you've experienced people in your life, and sometimes that's the only person who's willing to advocate for you, and they have to follow up, they have to keep you informed, and there has to be somebody who is not going to overpower you and try to decide where you want to go, and they can't send you to a dead end. And so it's very hard to find somebody. And here's the thing, is that advocating for yourself, the first step is often finding an advocate. And that shouldn't be that way. You should be able to make one call. You should call 211 and say, these are my needs. And they say, okay, here is a social worker or a caseworker from a nonprofit or from a government-funded agency, or maybe even a healthcare institution that is going to fit you with something, because there are representatives from healthcare institutions and things like that. And even, like, I hate to say it, but they were like salespeople. And sometimes those are the only people you get to. For instance, there was a huge healthcare conglomerate here on the West Coast, and it is known for really super cheap healthcare, but they have these marketing people that go into senior homes and stuff like that, and they put on this big song and dance. And I got sucked into that. I got some bad advice from family and some other people, and I got an insurance policy from a company called Kaiser Permanente, which I knew had a bad track record, but they had a good insurance plan. It was relatively inexpensive, and they had a good drug program, and they did a lot of things that were very organized. And most of what they did was harmful when it came to their actual practices, especially when it came to mental health. Absolutely devastating. And I was stuck in it for a while. I could not get out of that program unless I had somebody to advocate for me to change my insurance over, because that is how fucked up I was at the time. And it was sad because I was in crisis the whole time. I should have never had to take responsibility for this at all. And there was nobody there. The nonprofits, and the sad part is I had served these nonprofits for years, and still there was nobody to do anything significant when it came to my care. I even would talk to a mental health care professional who has experience in this. This is what I need. Do you think I need home health care? Oh, yes, you fit the functioning level of somebody who needs home health care. Well, can you make some calls for me? Yes. A month later, what happened? Oh, well, they said they'd call me back and they never called me back, or something really fucking ridiculous like that. Why don't you call somebody else? Why didn't you follow up? Why didn't you tell me about that? That is so harmful to somebody who is in crisis. That will contribute to them harming themselves. It'll undermine their will to live. And if you're trying to advocate for somebody, you have got to really communicate with them. You have got to follow through until you've done absolutely everything you can, until you're either burned out to where you can't do it. Find somebody else. If you can't find somebody else, saying, I can't do this anymore, I'm sorry, apologize. Do whatever you can to do what I consider is right. And what's right is communicating, being willing to do the hard work, following through, and if you can't do it, finding somebody else who can do that. So what happened in 2017 should have never happened. I was getting over a 9-month depression. I was forced in a place where I had to make phone calls to change my insurance. I had 2 months of another company that treated me even more horribly, that was $100 more a month. It was absolutely disgusting. I went from paying, I think, $28 a month to $122 a month from Kaiser to another healthcare giant called Providence, who has a track record of having better quality care. But I just happened to be with the wrong people at the wrong time, and what they did was something that I really need to get out there more and to tell people about what happens when you send somebody. Well, you just go to the emergency room and yeah, they will take you in. They have beds available. No, that wasn't true. They sent me home. They sent me home without a ride. They sent me home without my medications. And that's a whole nother story. And I'm glad I documented a lot of that because people need to hear this stuff. It is really shocking how I've been treated in the last 3 years when it comes to mental health practices and what I call cheap mental health. And so when you watch this series, you'll know that a lot of times it isn't really talking about self-advocacy. It's not talking so much about me trying to find help as much as it is talking about what it's like being in crisis. So I like doing weird art projects. The weirdest art project I think I've ever done is documenting a nervous breakdown. I documented a extended depression mental health crisis. I have some really disturbing videos that I won't post that I might do something with later on, but I would be very careful because they're very triggering. But this is the reality of it. If you have somebody who's suffering from cancer and they want to talk about the reality of what it's like, they'll have pictures of them dying or near death. They'll have pictures of sores on their body that are disgusting. It is no fun to be sick. And a lot of people don't want to hear it. A lot of people don't want to deal with it. And I spent years playing in stoner rock bands and shallow churches and organizations who, when the going gets tough, they're gone. And a lot of that has to do with a general apathy in this day and age. A lot of it has to do with living on West Coast urban culture. It tends to be very flaky. And it was very unfortunate. It was a perfect storm. It was the great clusterfuck that caused me to want to take my life. And the only thing that has kept me going is doing this project, trying to build up my career and my activism. And that has given me hope in my life in order to find a reason to live and to do this, and to hope that when I speak my truth about my experience, whether it contradicts the reality of those who don't understand that are in places of power and influence, I'm speaking my truth, and it's so powerful to do that, whether it's online or whether I'm doing it in person, because my activism isn't just blabbing forever on in front of a camera, but it's talking to folks. And when I do my advocacy, I tell them the way things were, I tell them the way things should be, and I tell them whether what they're doing works or not. And it's interesting the reactions that I get, but it's sad because people really generally don't do anything about it. But at least they can go home knowing that they're getting paid to waste people's time and to cause them to go deeper into crisis, which could cause self-harm, which is counterproductive to what these folks are getting paid to do. And that's what I like to talk about.